Good morning, Metalheads of your net. Welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown! A few days ago, I asked you for some input as to what album I should review next on the Metal Meltdown, and your choices were this album, Come Forth to Me, from Akurion, and Loop of Yesterdays from Azusa. And I'm certain that since you've clicked on this video, you've also read the title, therefore revealing the winner. But since we're here, that winner was obviously Come Forth to Me from Akurion, which itself might have been the best decision because, as you can also tell from the title of this video, I think this is a contender for Album of the Year. I know that those are very big words, because I know that almost consistently on the Metal Meltdown, we have been thrown some seriously fantastic material in 2020. From Kvelertak, Intronaut, Code Orange, Temple of Void, and so many more. And there's so much more to come as well. But I stand by that statement nonetheless, and I stand by it so strongly that I'm even willing to knock the Album of the Year contender title from Code Orange and from Temple of Void and their recent albums. That's right, they're no longer in the running. That's how goddamn good this is. Akurion is a mostly Canadian death metal supergroup featuring Oliver Pinard of Cryptopsy and Cattle Decapitation, Robin Milley, longtime guitarist for Neuraxis. On drums, you got Tommy McKinnon, a gentleman who has performed with Robin in the aforementioned Neuraxis and has also jumped back and forth between a variety of tech death and prog metal bands here in Canada, including the legendary Augury. And rounding out the lineup on lead vocals is one Mike DeSalvo, perhaps best known for a brief stint with Canadian death metal pioneers Cryptopsy. But while Come Forth to Me is the band's debut album, they are not necessarily a brand new band, having released some singles back in 2015 and even having formed back in 2012, just over 8 years ago. There are multiple simple reasons as to why this album didn't come out earlier, the most obvious of which being that some of these gentlemen are extremely busy and therefore schedules just did not line up. But the most significant and frankly relevant reasons for this album's delay have to do with Mike DeSalvo himself, as Mike has had to cope with his own terminal illnesses and the death of his longtime wife, Genevieve. Now, as far as I can tell, most of this material was written and recorded before a lot of this happened, but obviously these things forced the album to be indefinitely delayed, preventing Akurion from putting finishing touches where necessary. But now a few years have passed and Akurion clearly feel comfortable to finally deliver this album unto us. And thank God they did, because I honestly don't think you'll find a more cathartic, a more punishing, and a more exciting death metal so far in 2020. From start to finish, this album delivers some of the strongest Canadian technical death metal I have heard in an extremely long time, pulling influence from all of the acts we've mentioned thus far, with an added dose of the weirdness, insanity, and darkness of another legendary Canadian death metal band, Gorguts, which itself, by the way, not a coincidence, Luc Lemay actually appears consistently throughout the record as a composer and backup vocalist, creating something anxious, disturbingly heavy, surgically precise in its musicianship and technicality. And while a lot of this was created before we were aware of Mike's health issues and the death of his wife, the tension, the horror, the depression left in its wake is nonetheless felt on this album, making it not just musically and sonically devastating, but emotionally as well. There are moments on this record where it feels as if Mike is putting some kind of emotional and mental breakdown to tape. Opening track Leave Them Scars is a fantastic example thanks to its schizophrenic metallic grinding and the assistance of some of death metal's darkest and most iconic and dominating voices, Luc Lemay of Gorguts and Lord Worm, another former member of Cryptopsy. The combined forces of these incredible singers and this completely manic, unpredictable avant-garde death metal brew sounds like a sonic assault summoned from the bowels of hell itself. Another great example, the track Bed Sores to the Bone, which itself seems oddly prophetic in retrospect. Because while Mike's health and family issues had yet to really materialize at the point of this song's creation, the song does become more effective when you consider these things, as the song is literally about someone, perhaps himself or perhaps someone he loves, literally waiting in a hospital bed to die. And honestly, once the song started going and anxiety and tension started building up and the vision and the message was made all the more clear, I was suddenly reminded of how my grandfather looked when he was dying after hurting himself falling down the stairs. He had Alzheimer's late in his life, and it got to the point where he couldn't do and perform basic functions. So one day, he just lost all basic motor capabilities and fell down the stairs and smashed his head in. And I remember doctors putting needles in him, and I remember him being hooked up to a machine, and even though he had no idea what was really happening, he somehow summoned the strength, pulled out an IV cord, and said no. And that was it. That was the last thing he said. This moment has stuck with me for years, and this song feels like the sonic adaptation of that moment. But musically speaking, one of my favorite examples of this emotional core on the record comes from Petals from a Rose Eventually Wither to Black, which features Mike's late wife, Genevieve, on backup vocals. There's something so serene, bittersweet, even romantic about this vocal dynamic, and it becomes all the more powerful when contrasted with this explosive, experimental, and progressive death metal. And then there's the big showstopper of the record, the 11.5-minute Souvenir Gardens. An incredibly dramatic and almost operatic piece that opens with some incredible orchestral sections complete with looming, ominous strings, blaring horns, kind of hearkening to some of the most twisted and bleak moments of Gorguts' Colored Sand, which I don't think is a coincidence since Luc Lemay is on this track as well, but nonetheless. Eventually evolving into an explosive little death metal hand grenade with some of the thickest, the juiciest, and even grooviest riffs on this fucking record. And you did not hear me incorrectly, folks. I indeed said groovy. It gets so groovy, so chunky in its final moments that it kind of starts to sound like this incredibly fucked up super death metal take on Lamb of God. Akurion's ability to multitask is nothing short of incredible. I really can't think of a lot of other modern death metal bands that are able to so seamlessly balance emotional complexity, vulnerability, and brutality with musical ingenuity and creativity, technical precision, and the energy, the chaos, and the inherent fun that is frankly expected of any death metal album. Even in its darkest, weirdest, and most disturbing moments, this album isn't ever not fun. I'm constantly banging my head. I'm constantly pumping my fists. And I promise you, if the day ever comes where we're allowed to leave quarantine and Akurion plays a show, I'm gonna be there and I'm gonna start a motherfucking mosh pit. Especially if they end up playing Year of the Pig, a hyper-violent and cynical track that shows Akurion quite literally giving the middle finger to the entire planet. Now, one could definitely argue that even in moments like this, Come Forth to Me can be quite mentally taxing and demanding. Trust me, I know, this album literally reminded me of my fucking dying grandfather, so I totally get it. But that's also why this album is as incredible and even triumphant as it is to me. Akurion, despite the nonsense, despite the bullshit, despite everything they've been through, despite all of these instances that would have derailed even the big guns of heavy metal, are still kicking, and they're still jamming, and they're still ready to fucking put their stamp on the world. There's a part of me that's even somewhat inspired by the determination, perseverance, and confidence that Akurion have displayed on this record and even in these last 8 years leading up to this record. I think by now most of you will have figured out my score, but just in case you haven't, let's just get it out there. 4.5 out of 5. This is seriously an incredible record, and I'm seriously in love with this. This is the best death metal album I've heard this year so far, and it could very well end up in my top 5 at the end of 2020. It's dynamic, it's ferocious, it's intelligent, it's expressive, it feels so organic and real and honest and brutal. It's everything I really look for in a great, even timeless metal album. Constructed by an inarguably talented group of people who were dedicated to this project from its inception to its release now. If this album isn't already on your radar, it fucking goddamn better be. Because at this point, I'm willing to bet money that you will not find a better death metal album in 2020. 4.5 out of 5, a seriously incredible record. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be. So what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? Thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.